audio. Very good. So welcome again. And thanks for joining this webinar on Food Systems Dashboard, a decision-making tool for better governance decisions. Quite a mouthful, but very good. Just to say that this webinar is part of the World Bank's Data-Driven and Digital Agriculture webinar series, which we also call What's Cooking. And in this series, we invite innovators, thought leaders, and World Bank task team leaders who are transforming agriculture and food system using data-driven and digital agriculture. So I think with Haddad and with Lawrence and with Jess, I think we're a very good company today. I think today's webinar is very relevant and timely. And in my opening remarks, I would like to put some context to this. First of all, I would like to say that traditionally the bank has focused very much on agriculture and agriculture production systems, of course, with an increased focus over time on value chains. But I think this in 2015, with the establishment of the agriculture global practice, this started changing and we're putting food systems more central in our narrative. And in 2019, a year ago, it has resulted in a formal change of the name of the agriculture global practice at the bank into agriculture and food global practice, reflecting this increased focus on food systems. So by doing so, I think we are now focusing more systematically on how food systems can contribute to healthy people by providing healthy diets, can contribute to a healthy planet by providing nature-based solutions, and can contribute to a healthy economy by contributing to inclusive growth. I think also, this increased focus on food systems has led to some important insights, which are also relevant, I think, to the discussion and presentation today. A couple of points here. The first insight is that if you take a food systems approach and perspectives and you factor in the hidden cost of the food system related to health and environment, clearly the global food system right now is not adding value, but actually, in fact, subtracting value. And of course, this contrasts quite sharply, with the Green Revolution narrative. A second insight is that the global food system, faces mounting challenges, to feed 9.8 billion people by 2050, while at the same time avoiding deforestation, as well as reducing the carbon footprint. It is difficult to see that this challenge can be met with business as usual, and particularly also taking in consideration the setback that is caused by COVID-19. I think the third insight is that there are many opportunities for triple wins, to enhance productivity, improve resilience, and work on mitigation in simultaneous fashion. And therefore, a transition to a global food system that is productive, inclusive, and resilient and sustainable, in our view, will generate significant economic dividends and business opportunities in the medium to long run. This is a very positive insight, of course. But at the same time, this is the fourth insight, the cost of this transition is significant, estimated around $300 to $350 billion per year. Between now and 2030, and clearly not a single institution actually can provide for those resources, even not the World Bank, although we would love to do it, of course, but we can't. It means that collaboration and leverage will be critical dimensions of this transition of the global food system that we are aiming for and looking for. And of course, the fifth and last important insight is that with the public sector providing about $600 billion in public support to agriculture, there's an important role for the governments, to play in creating an enabling environment for this transition to happen and creating the right incentives for it. And, and this might be a little bit counterintuitive in the sense that very often, of course, agriculture is seen as a private sector activity, but clearly there's a very important role for the government to play here. So the bank is very much engaging on this agenda to analytics, policy advice, and financial support. We're also in the process of putting up a dedicated Food Systems 2030 umbrella multi-donor trust fund that will serve as a catalyst, for systemic change by leveraging public resources to repurposing of public support, as well as crowding in private sector investments into greening agriculture production and greening supply chain through pre-investment financing and a de-risking facility. Now, this transition, of course, will not be easy, and it will actually face many challenges. and for the following reasons. I mean, first, the transition agenda is very multi-sectoral. I mean, requiring institutions to work together who normally don't work together. And second, I mean, the agenda is very political, as there are many vested interests. And of course, the third challenge is that the agenda is very knowledge intensive, as solutions need to be adapted to local conditions. There are no silver bullets and there are no blueprints. I think, this is the context that actually points to the appointment, I think, of the food systems dashboard that we're discussing today. But I think this could play an important role in overcoming, I mean, these challenges that I just mentioned. And for that reason, I'm very pleased that this is the focus of our webinar today. So to showcase the dashboard, we are very pleased to have with us Lawrence Haddad, who is the Executive Director of the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, and Jessica Fenzo, a Professor of Global Food Policy and Ethics, I mean, with the Johns Hopkins University. The bios of Lawrence and Jessica have been distributed along with the invitation. So I'm not providing details here, but please have a look at, for the participants, please have a look at them, because I think they're really impressive. So following their presentation of the food system dashboard, which will take about 40 minutes, we will have Madhu Gautam, lead agricultural economist, and Geeta Sethi, the global lead for food systems at the Agriculture and Food Global Practice in the World Bank as discussions. I mean, this will take about 20 minutes. After this, we will open it for Q&A. And so in order to ask your questions, and this is for the participants, please use the chat box, and you can start using this right from the start of the presentations. I mean, when the presentation is being put forward, I mean, you can put in your questions as we go along. Also, for all participants will get the presentations recordings and a curated chat reflecting the discussion. This webinar series is available, so there will actually more webinars as part of this series. This webinar series is available on the World Bank's Open and Learning Campus. So the link for that is at the bottom of the announcement of this webinar. So if you want to participate in future webinars, I mean, please check out the agenda. So I think that is it for my introduction. So at this point then, I would like to hand it over to either Lawrence or Jessica to kick us off on the presentation. I don't know, Lawrence or Jessica, who's going to start, but whoever you have decided, you have the floor. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Martin. I'm going to make a few brief comments, and then Jess is going to launch into the slides, and then I'll pick up the slides about halfway through. So thank you so much for hosting us. We really appreciate it. Thank you, colleagues, for, especially in the US, for waking up early and dialing into this and listening to us drone on about food systems dashboards. We'll try and make it interesting. We started this because of three things. First thing was Jess and I were working together on the Global Nutrition Report back in 2014. And there was a chapter on food systems, and we were incredibly frustrated that it was so difficult to get data on food systems. Then we worked together, and Jess was leading the Committee on Food Security's high-level panel of experts report on food systems and diets. And we found out it was incredibly frustrating to get data on food systems. And then I joined GAIN, Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition, and we have 10 country offices, and I wanted our country offices to have access to the best food system data in their countries. And again, it was incredibly time-consuming and difficult to put all of that together. So with those three experiences, we both decided to do something about it. And we raised a little bit of seed funding, and we put together this dashboard, which has the three elements that Jess will walk you through. How do we describe a food system at the national level? It's only the national level at the moment. How do you describe a food system? And then we're currently working on now, how do you diagnose the data to tell us which parts of the food system are weak or strong? And then how do you link that to actions? We call it the decide function, to figure out, okay, this is what it looks like, this is where it needs work, what can we actually do to fix it? So Jess and her team have done most of the work really so far, and I'll pass it back to you, Jess.
Thank you, Lawrence, and thanks so much to be here with the World Bank and friends. We're really pleased to show a bit of what this dashboard can do and its future potential of what we're hoping it can grow into, working with different partners. So this, like Lawrence had said, is a partnership with Gain and Johns Hopkins, but there's many other partners that have been really pivotal in developing the dashboard, including FAO, colleagues from Michigan State and University of Michigan, Harvard. Many people are working with us to contribute data, like Cicero, NASA, CIAT, Bioversity, many different groups, World Wildlife Fund. So stay tuned for more data, and we'll talk a bit about that. So just to get us started, why do food systems matter? I mean, food is obviously an exceptionality in society. We all need it to survive, but it very much surrounds our everyday life, our culture, our traditions. But it's also so critically important for economic growth, economic equity, environmental health, and of course, the two areas that Lawrence and I are particularly interested in is human health, nutrition, and healthy diets. But food systems are strained, they're challenged because of many different factors that are within food systems, but obviously external to food systems, like climate change, urbanization, migration issues. And poor diets that are born from food systems remain a leading cause of morbidity, mortality, and disability worldwide. So the diets that most people are consuming in the world remain suboptimal for human health. And even more so now, healthy diets are not accessible for many, they're costly for many. And we're seeing that the type of diets we're eating put incredible environmental constraints on the planet. But luckily, there's increased attention towards food systems. There's a lot of international development geared towards trying to improve food systems because they're so vital for diets, health, environment, climate, and livelihoods. And we're seeing a real uptick in the attention being drawn to food systems. And we know that food systems are so influential across many different elements of policy and politics. And we see that every day in the news, but we know that food influences so many different other political strands of work, not only environment and economics, but education, health, women's issues, urban and rural development. So this is an incredible moment to be focusing on food systems because of the 2021 UN Food Summit next year, in which Lawrence is with us and can talk in some detail because he's leading one of the action tracks on healthy diets, so which we're really pleased about. It brings more attention to the dashboard, and we hope that the dashboard becomes an important decision-making tool for the UN Food Systems Summit next year. So the diets that we are consuming obviously contribute to the massive global malnutrition burden that we are all witnessing. This burden is universal and it's complex. I don't have to go too much into these numbers, but when you look at these statistics, it's pretty alarming to see that we have over 2 billion people who are overweight and obese. We still have 20% of the world's children under the age of 5 who are struggling with stunting. We still have over 500 million people who go to bed hungry every night. Now, most of these numbers are not getting better, they're getting worse, or if they are coming down, it's much too slow. So we're really at a crossroads where you see some global health indicators like child mortality coming down dramatically. But why aren't we seeing that with nutrition? Well, diets and food systems are a big reason why. So as Lawrence had said, we decided to build this food systems dashboard. And one of the bigger reasons was that policymakers need to understand their food system, what kind of food systems are in their country, and understand how they're faring, how they are providing diets for their citizens. But the data to inform policymakers is not there, or it's fragmented, or it's out of date. So policymakers are often in the dark on how to manage their food systems, and they don't know where to intervene. They don't know where to start to try to improve them. So this dashboard is one tool, and there's other dashboards coming out. So it shows that there's a growing space here on visualization tools. But it's meant to help policymakers contextualize their food systems and be able to diagnose them and make decisions on them. And that's exactly what we're aiming to do. So right now, the dashboard is describing food systems, helping stakeholders understand what food systems look like in different countries. We're now working on two other pieces: diagnosing, the ability to assess how food systems are functioning and compare them to other food systems across countries, and the decide tool. What are the best policy actions to take to improve food systems? And we'll talk about that a bit later. We have many different users. We hope that everyone is able to use the dashboard and finds it useful. But of course, our main users are those working in countries, working in regions, working at the global level, who work on food systems. And policymakers are the key piece to that. National Statistical Agency workers are also another key group. And of course, UN, NGO, development practitioners, civil society organizations, academics and researchers, and business leaders and entrepreneurs are also key users of the interface. So this is the main homepage of the dashboard. It's www.foodsystemsdashboard.org. We've listed some of our main partners on the front page, but we have many other partners if you dig into the dashboard. So I'm going to quickly walk you through the elements of it, and then Lawrence will take you through some case studies of how you could use it to help inform decision making. We tried to take quite a rigorous approach. Nature Food published an article a couple months ago laying out the purpose of the dashboard, and I encourage you all to look at that article that really kind of explains our rationale for why we set it up if you want more details. And what we did was we took the high-level panel of experts, nutrition and food systems report framework, we adapted it slightly, and we tried to find indicators that matched across this framework. So we looked for food supply indicators, we looked for what's food environment indicators. That's the place where you as a consumer go and walk into a market, a restaurant, or a cafeteria, and you make a decision about what you're going to buy or order. And of course, there's many different triggers that influence your decision making. Consumers bring with them many different factors to when they come to make a decision about their diets, their purchasing power, their aspirations, their knowledge. And these all influence diets, and then health and environment, social and economic outcomes. And along the top are these external drivers that influence food systems. Some I mentioned earlier: urbanization, climate change, politics, trade. So we tried to pull together indicators across this entire framework. And of course, this group might be particularly interested in the food supply indicators: ag, production, storage, distribution, processing, packaging. And many of those came from the FAO database. So here are the number of indicators we have, and we took these indicators through a criteria, and you'll see we have, in some categories of the framework, more indicators than in other places. You'll note we have no indicators on consumer behavior. Now, there's indicators on consumer behavior out there, But what we wanted to do was capture indicators that represent most countries in the world. When you look at a lot of the consumer behavior indicators, they're really for the United States or the UK or a couple of select high-income countries. And we didn't want to bias the dashboard towards just several high-income countries. So we tried to choose indicators that represent most countries in the world. We have 170 indicators now, but by January, we're doing a push and we'll have over 250 indicators, many of them being environmental indicators and economic indicators. So I'll walk you through where we're at with the dashboard now. We've really described food systems and all their intricacies. There's an about page you can go to that really goes into the background of the dashboard. It provides you a bit of a 101 of what are food systems, walks you through the elements of food systems, the outcomes of food systems, and you can print out, you don't want to read on the screen, you can print out a PDF of a primer on food systems. And it obviously has all the data sources and methodology and the limitations of some of the indicators that you see. Another way to go through the dashboard is through these country profiles. These country profiles take those 170 indicators. What we've done is we've curated a set of those 170 indicators, about 30 indicators. And what you can do is look at a country and get a macro view, a snapshot, a profile of how the food system looks in that country. And here's just some examples of that country profile that, of course, is all downloadable as a PDF. And we've captured a couple of indicators on the food supply, food environment, drivers, individual factors, nutrition and diet outcomes. And it presents them in a very visually appealing, easy to understand way, and doesn't require you to create graphs. So the graphs are already pre-made and easy to understand for someone who doesn't really want to fiddle with data very much. Now, the other way to enter the dashboard is this compare and analyze. This is the most robust use of the tool, in which you can look at all 170 indicators across the world, by region, by country, in any kind of format you want, by maps, by bar graphs, by pie charts, by rank charts, by bubble charts. And you can look at any of the 170 indicators. So here, for example, is greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture, a world map with gradients. This on the right is showing you the same by a bar chart. So you can look and do a deep dive in any indicator that you want in any way. You can also compare associations of indicators. This is showing you the prevalence of undernutrition on the y-axis and adult overweight over time, the Hans Rosling approach to looking at data and looking at the convergence and the associations of those two indicators. So you can do this really in many different ways across different indicators, showing you not only how these indicators change over time, but the impact at the country level by looking at the bubble sizes, which shows population size. You can look at the data. You can disaggregate by income classification. We use the World Bank income classifications from high, upper middle, lower middle, and low income. So you can look at data that way. And one thing that was interesting that we did was we created 5 food system typologies. And now typologies are limited in that they cluster countries together. And we know that a country has multiple types of food systems within a country, but it does give you some broad comparisons that you can make in where countries generally are in their food system classification. So we have created these 5 typologies from rural and traditional to very industrialized and consolidated. So here you'll see in orange is rural and traditional, still much of sub-Saharan Africa, which has a significant population of rural peoples, compared to the United States, very industrialized, consolidated type of food system overall, and a lot of hypermarkets, etc. So you can do some comparisons of the indicators and compare to food system type. And here's just an example of that. This is showing you retail value of ultra-processed foods per capita. Ultra-processed foods are considered unhealthy foods. There's a high demand for these foods because they're convenient, tasty, and cheap. And of course, in high-income countries, particularly in the United States, it makes up a good portion of the diet. And what this is comparing is adult obesity on the y-axis and retail value of ultra-processed food sales per capita. And when you map out just the broad food system types, you see that industrialized and consolidated, there's a very high correlation between obesity and the expenditures on these ultra-processed foods. But the question is, when you look at these typologies, some of the typologies in between, the emerging and diversifying, the modernizing and formalizing, you could consider those the transitioning economies. Do these countries have to follow this same path as what America has done, or Europe or Mexico or Australia? Can they leapfrog and avoid this high levels of obesity and high demand for ultra-processed food? So it provides you some insights into how to potentially stop this trend that we see. And you can also do mappings, like which countries within which types are high consumers of ultra-processed foods. And this is showing you industrialized and consolidated countries. And when you look at these maps, you can start asking questions like, why do Argentina and Spain have a lower per capita retail sales of ultra-processed food as compared to other countries in this typology? Or in informal and expanding typologies, why did places like Bolivia and Myanmar have such high sales of ultra-processed foods compared to others in their country? And you can start to work backwards and look at the food supply, look at cost of diets, and try to untangle some of these trends. All of the data is downloadable. You can download the entire spreadsheet. I don't recommend that because there's like 5 million data points. But you can select certain data that you want to download. You can also download the metadata. What's the definition of the indicator? What's its relevance to food systems? How is it calculated? Where is it from? And what are some of the limitations? So if you're very interested in a few indicators, you can do that as well. Now, the next steps that we're working on over the next few months are the diagnose and the decide. So you go to the dashboard, you see that food systems are characterized. Well, what do you do if they are off track? And that is exactly what we're doing. We're taking a set of indicators, or curating a smaller set of indicators, what we're calling sentinel indicators, and we're developing targets in a traffic light system for each of those sentinel indicators. So you can look at Kenya, you can look at Bolivia, and see where in the food system are you on track or off track. And with that will be the second piece is, okay, well, what do I do about that if my food system's off track? If my food supply isn't functioning as well as it should be? If my food environments are generating unhealthy food purchases, what do I do about that as a policymaker? And we're developing in collaboration with Corinna Hawks and her team, policy actions and recommendations that countries can consider in taking on to improve certain parts of their food system. So we're working on that as well. So stay tuned. We hope to launch that in January, which will create a much more robust dashboard, in that it's not just describing, but it's diagnosing and deciding. And again, in January, we're doing a big push, particularly on environmental sustainability and climate indicators. So we're really looking forward to having much more on that as we go into 2021 with the UN Food Summit. I'll turn it over to Lawrence now.
Thanks, Jess. And Vivek, if you could turn it over to me for, great. Let me just share my content. Right, so let me walk you through a few examples of use. Can you see that okay, everyone? And Jess, can you see that?
It's great.
Okay,
yep.
So, you know, this is quite, you know, when you open up the dashboard, it's quite daunting. You look at it and you can quite easily get lost in the numbers. And so we're trying very hard now to figure out how do we improve the use functions. So we have a competition that's ongoing right now to sort of surface how people are using the dashboard and how they plan to use the dashboard. Remember, it's only been live for about 2 or 3 months. And we're also developing a series of use examples. And then once the decide and diagnose functions are in place in January, we'll really be able to take off. But just to give you a sense of how this could be used, let me walk you through a few hypothetical examples. So, for example, you'll see in Kenya, if you're a Ugandan policymaker, you will be pretty alarmed at the high levels of cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and diet-related cancers. And 22% of the probability of dying between 30 and 70 years from these types of non-communicable diseases is 22%. And that's much higher than it is for, I can't seem to, okay, that's much higher than it is for Kenya. Kenya, it's only 13%, right? That's the neighbor. So you might be thinking, what's going on? Well, the dashboard will help you figure, get some clues. It won't tell you what you need to do, but it'll give you some clues. Compared to Kenya, Uganda has a pretty low vegetable intake. I can't remember what the units are, grams per day, 58 in Uganda, 96 in Kenya. This is domestic level of consumption. The price of the vegetables in Uganda is also higher, 56 compared to 47. And the supply of vegetables in Uganda is lower than in Kenya, 79 compared to 109. And perhaps most strikingly, the yields of vegetable is a third in Uganda of what it is in Kenya. Much of that is for export, but not all of it, obviously. In addition, so that's the supply side. In addition, on the demand side, Uganda just doesn't have a set of publicly available food-based dietary guidelines. Kenya does, and in those guidelines, it strongly urges the population to consume more vegetables. So, if you're a Kenyan policymaker and you're worried about high levels of diet-related chronic illness, one of the things you might want to explore is the low consumption of vegetables, the more expensive vegetables, the lower supply of vegetables, the lower productivity of vegetables, and you've got no dietary guidelines on vegetables. So you can have a supply side investigation, and you can look at a demand side. It doesn't really matter if you have food-based dietary guidelines. Are we doing anything else on the demand side to boost the desirability of consuming vegetables? So that's sort of one example, and these neighbor examples are always very powerful with national level policymakers. But there's also opportunities for businesses, and I've picked a slightly unusual country in Africa, Gabon, but it has a food system typology that I think many other countries in Africa are going to be gravitating towards. So it's useful to look at it. It's got one of the highest levels of consumption of sugar-sweetened beverages in Africa. It has one of the highest levels of type 2 diabetes in Africa. And interestingly enough, cost is not a big constraint to securing a diet. This is the cost of nutrition adequacy as a percent of household food expenditure. And you can see in Gabon, it's 37%. So that's, that's not a ridiculously high percentage. Some countries, in Ethiopia, for example, that 37% is 155%. So buying a nutritionally adequate diet in Ethiopia is a real challenge on average. In Gabon, it's not. So that, and income levels, we know from various natural resource endowments, is very high, or reasonably high in Gabon. However, there are no policies on marketing of junk food to children. That's what the dashboard data tell us. And there's a big urban population. It's a small population, but it's highly urban. But even the rural population, which is about 11 or 12%, has good access. At least half of the population has good access to electricity in rural areas. So it seems, if you're a business and putting aside the small size of the Gabon market, it seems like it's an excellent prospect for businesses that are interested in producing and marketing a healthy, low sugar food. The demand for sweet foods is there. Diabetes is high, incomes are high, urban markets are strong, cost doesn't seem to be a major constraint to healthy eating. Electricity is accessible if the product you're producing needs to be cooled. And the regulatory playing field doesn't force every company to do the same thing. So there is space for company differentiation and product differentiation. So again, this seems to be an opportunity for a business there. Second business opportunity focuses on Thailand. So where is fast food routinely purchased by adolescents? And adolescents are really important for businesses, because if you can get an adolescent to display any sort of loyalty to your product, you will have them for a long period of time in all likelihood. So Thailand, fast food is routinely purchased by adolescents in Thailand 3 times a week. Childhood obesity is relatively high in Thailand. 22% of kids are obese. That's actually very high. It's only about 33% in the UK. Where is the cost of a nutritious diet relatively inexpensive? Like Gabon, the cost of a nutrient adequate diet is only about 1/3 of household food expenditure. So cost per se doesn't seem to be a big barrier. So Thailand seems an excellent prospect, again, for businesses that are aiming to produce and market healthy takeout foods that are geared to adolescents. Adolescents are potential customers for life, consumers for life. They have high consumption of takeout food by adolescents, but high levels of childhood obesity. So there's a public health priority here. Families are worried about this issue. Cost doesn't seem to be a big constraint to the purchase of healthy diets. And so here's a space to produce something that is fast food geared towards adolescents, but is actually healthier than the options they have at the moment. We were asked to talk about the World Bank's World Bank's role. I do so with much trepidation. I am not an expert on the bank. I'm not an insider at the bank. I've never worked at the bank. But we do know something about the bank's comparative advantages. So please take this view as seriously as you would like. But in our view, the bank is late to food systems. So you're really playing catch up. So I think you have to be in there've been a ton of reports on food systems in the last 6-7 years. And the bank is playing catch up. So I think it's really behooves the bank to really learn about what's been done already and really build on that rather than seek to emulate it. When you look at the bank's comparative advantage, my view and Jess's view is what you can do is operate with governments at scale, and you can crowd in funding, finance and TA from public and private sectors and TA. You have incredible capacity and experience across all the SDGs, including poverty, food security, livelihoods, climate, biodiversity, nutrition, all the things that are important for food systems. And you have obviously an incredibly powerful analytical capacity, both in DC and in the countries. and very powerful networks. Most of the work you do, nearly all of the work you do, I like to think, is evidence driven, and often you're the ones not only consuming the evidence but generating it. Not sure the world needs another global platform or observatory for food systems, but what we do need are examples of food system transformations. This phrase is bandied around a lot, food system transformation. Everyone likes to say it. Not too many people know what it means, and I don't think anyone has done it yet. So what the world really needs is evidence and inspiration and know-how of, okay, how do we actually transform a food system? Do we have to operate in the demand side and the supply side and the enabling environment side all at the same time? Or can we focus on one of those three or two of those three things? If we do need to focus on all those three things, how on earth do we go about doing it? Are there any, is it all very bespoke, or are there some commonalities, some common issues that we can develop and learn from? So we really need demonstration effects and examples. And I think for me, that's the kind of thing the bank can do. The bank's comparative advantages make it perfect to support governments, to crowd in all the other stakeholders to design and implement a food system transformation in a given geography. It could be a district or a province or a region or a city or a secondary city. But I think you have that capacity to support governments who really want to do that. I think you have the capacity to do that. So on the sustainability of the dashboard, we've established a permanent domain for it. We're collaborating with partner organizations, adding data in as it emerges. We're pretty well funded, and we will get better funded over the next 5 years. But I think after the next 5 years, we'd really like to see this migrate to an institutional home. That's somewhere that's a bit more sustainable. So I think that is it, Jess. The important point is, you know, from our perspective, please use this dashboard, share it. Really important to help us improve it. We know it's not perfect. We think it's the best thing out there, but it's, you know, it's only better than the next best thing. It's not nearly as good as it could be. And most importantly, we want people to really act on it. I think that's it, Martin and Jess, unless you have anything else to add.
Just to maybe so I see some questions coming in. We're working on, and it was in the slide, GAIN is leading on sharing and testing the dashboard in multiple countries. And so we're doing some country engagement with the dashboard. The first one will be in Senegal, and that's supported by USAID and working with the USAID mission. But we're also going to be testing it in some of the GAIN country, with the GAIN country offices, Tanzania, Indonesia. We have some interest from governments in India, China, some in Latin America. So we'll be testing and garnering feedback at the country level and their use of it. And with that, and because I'm sure there'll be some questions coming up, we're going to be looking at what kind of subnational data we can add to the dashboard as another sort of phase of the dashboard, is moving and drilling down at the subnational level, just because I'm sure there'll be questions that come up on that, and I see some already in the chat.
Very good. Thank you very much, Jessica, and thank you very much, Lawrence. I mean, for this presentation. I mean, indicating why this food systems dashboard is important. You know, how it works, how to apply it, and I also, of course, I mean, I looked at interest. I mean, your view on how you see the role of the World Bank, and definitely, you know, this is an area where we would be very much, you know, upfront in, you know, in leading on the action and the implementation of food systems approaches. So that's what we are aiming for. So let's turn to our discussions now. And maybe I turn to Geeta Sethi, our global lead for food systems. Well, actually, we're transitioning that. Actually, we positioning this now more, and I think it's very relevant for the presentation and discussion today, as well as with a focus on healthy and sustainable diets. So Geeta, please come in. I mean, you have up to 10 minutes, I mean, for your remarks and intervention. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Martin. A very fond hello to Lawrence and Jess again. It is an honor for me to have been invited as a discussant for this webinar and to see so many friends and familiar faces. It is a great initiative in a very timely manner. It's comprehensive, it's transparent across the entire food system, and it removes the often cited excuse that there is no data for not taking actions. For the database to make an impact on policy, and we've heard this both from Lawrence and Jess, first we need the availability of high quality data in a timely manner. And the second is the technical capacity to interpret the information and use it for practical policymakers. For the first point, given the dashboard is an aggregator of existing data, the obvious limitations are availability and quality of existing data. We hope this initiative is sustained, as Lawrence mentioned, and maintained as a living dashboard, meaning that it'll be checked and updated as we learn more, not just from getting new data, but also experimenting with it. On the second point, how do we avoid the dashboard from becoming a data dump? How can the dashboard support policymakers who are grappling with very specific challenge in a given country context? How can we use communicate a story? We've got sense of some of the information out there, and I think the ongoing contest would yield interesting results to learn from real life examples. Let me turn to the World Bank now. At the World Bank, this tool could be very, very powerful. As Martin has alluded, we are in the process of developing a program to assist countries in improving their food systems according to their policy goals as they relate to diets, environment, and economic prosperity. So really a food systems that is able to hit the triple bottom line of sustainability, prosperity, and healthy people. Food Systems 2030. And as you all have alluded to, the important agenda is really at the national level to really be able to customize important policy implications based on policy priorities for the countries. But it also means that the boundary issues, health and food and climate of food, are very important to really create this customized package of assistance for our clients. And my belief in hearing you and having used navigated through the dashboard, which is a bit daunting, I agree. The dashboard is going to be a very important input in that process. I think the dashboard also helps us in framing the hypotheses and questions that are most relevant. For example, we are very interested in economic factors that may induce behaviors towards better diets. The dashboard indicators can suggest some of the critical variables at play, guiding us on how best to approach the problem. How does income influence diets, and which income policies may be more effective for which country and which income bracket? I mean, what are we trying to address, and therefore then what would be the right policy package on incomes? Conditional transfers, non-conditional. Similarly, on relative prices. Do relative prices explain the nutritional content of current consumption? Or if prices were to reflect externalities, what would nutrition consumption look like? Similarly, on taxes and subsidies, how would taxes on specific nutrition items affect consumption, productivity, GHGs, the environmental footprint, and other policy goals? And how would subsidies for certain vegetable production and other consumption affect nutrition intake and policy goals of interest? Another very important policy conversation that Lawrence has played a very important role is the affordability story. There is a huge amount of work and thinking now in terms of the personal cost of having healthy diets, and which means there are going to be implications for us and many others in calculating these poverty lines. That is now no longer about food security, but maybe about healthy diets. In other words, the dashboard is going to be a useful tool to help us and our clients develop the analytical basis for policy reform. We will certainly use it as we partner with our clients to develop more food systems diagnostics and to pinpoint priority areas for the World Bank technical or investment support. I can say today that our next country of engagements on food diagnostics is Mexico and Ethiopia. And we propose to use the dashboard and may be able to make concrete suggestions for making it even better. We would also very much look forward to partnering with you as we learn from using the dashboard or how to use the dashboard more effectively on certain hypotheses that move us towards a food system that is able to contribute to planet, people, and economies. So great initiative, congratulations. It truly is very inspiring, and I think it's going to have a huge impact in the way we work on certain agendas going forward. Thank you very much. Over to you, Martin.
Thank you very much, Geeta, and thanks for pointing out a number of important issues, behaviors for better diets, subsidies, affordability, the relation between poverty line and healthy diets, nutritional security, and good to indicate, I mean, that as Lawrence was saying at the end, you know, people need to act on it, and good to see that you intend to do that in our diagnostics in Mexico and Ethiopia. I turn it now over to Madhur, who's our lead agriculture economist in the Global Engagement Unit of the Agriculture and Food Global Practice. But just to kind of a heads up to Lawrence and to Jess, after Madhur is finished, you know, I will go to you and ask you to kind of respond to some of the issues that our discussions are raising. So just a heads up. So Madhur, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Martin. A great presentation, Lawrence and Jess. This as Geeta said, this is an excellent, fantastic initiative. I think it overcomes a lot of the challenges that we normally face in doing our analytical work and pulling information together from different sources. It is, you know, information and data are fragmented. Everybody's doing their own thing, focusing on sort of one piece of the puzzle, and it's great to sort of bring it together to start seeing overall things, how they hang together and how they come together. So it's extremely useful. I think in that sense, it's a great service, but as you are noting and we have noted, it's also a little bit frustrating because some of the key variables are just missing. So I think that really is one area where additional effort is needed, additional partnerships are needed to sort of say, what are those missing pieces that we need to sort of focus on and work on. And one of those is, you know, getting a bit more specific indicators. For example, in the context of COVID-19, and you know, we were all concerned about food systems. Everybody was working on this, except, you know, timeliness of the data and the quality of the data were a huge issue. So that's just one example that, you know, how do we sort of work together to say, how can we improve on the missing indicators and bring in the missing pieces of the puzzle. And as you're populating this, you know, I looked at the dashboard. I've looked at it before, but I looked at it again last night. And there are many of these buckets which are, you know, not as populated as they need to be, which is understandable. It's a work in progress. But, you know, on markets and marketing, simple indicators about how efficient the markets are and how the prices change and so on. I mean, it can convey a lot of things, and Geeta has already highlighted the, you know, critical role that prices can play. As you understand well, of course, that, you know, nutrition outcomes are multi-sector outcomes and driven by many different factors. So how do we put that? So, you know, I had two main comments. One is sort of a lot of what we have done in the past and we continue to do, is to say, okay, so what's wrong with what we see today, and where things are going wrong in terms of the outcomes that are the undesirable outcomes. And the question is, as soon as we sort of confront our policymakers, the first question that they ask us is, okay, fine. To some extent, they know this. To a large extent, they know this. The question is, what do we do about it? And this is where I think your dashboard and the causal pathway or the influence model, I think, is important. And that one comment there, I think one of the key issues is looking at the different buckets that you have: supply chain, environment, in individual factors, and finally the behaviors. The question is, what is driving each of those, going from one to the other, and what are the public policy actions that can help in addressing those? And that's where I think the comments that Geeta made on identifying the key variables that are critical becomes important. And here, I didn't see earlier, my one comment was going to be, is it possible to sort of come up with and work with both the academics and the people who work with governments like FAO and we do, in sort of coming up with key indicators, which are like your synthetic indicators, which you might be, I think, referring to as your sentinel indicators. What are the indicators that we should focus on that will drive the system from point A to point B, and through the various steps in between? Of course, what happens on the farm and between farm and the markets is very different than what happens at the retail level and between the retail level and the consumers. So those are, I think, one area where it would be very useful, and that will also sort of help put the discussion and guide the discussion in the right direction. I think the examples that you have, Kenya and Uganda, were great, but I've worked on both of them, lived in Uganda, and we can have a discussion on why, what is really the difference there? Why do we see this is happening? And the nutritional outcome indicators, obesity indicators, are an outcome indicators. The question is, what is in the background? I know that in Horticulture USAID spent 10 years trying to come up with different varieties of vegetables that could potentially be grown on a large scale, but they weren't able to. They weren't quite successful in that. So there are other indicators, other factors that might be coming in that might be useful to bring in agronomists and others to sort of also perhaps look at that. And lastly, the last point I would say, and again, something that Geeta had referred to directly and indirectly, is the role of policies. Ultimately, what's in the hands of the policy makers is policies. Policies include both economic policies, price policies, trade policies, and public expenditures and public investments. So I think, what are the key policies and what indicators can we point to that sort of link the inputs and outputs, and look at some of these food system key indicators? And that's an area that I think we would, of course, need to work together and see what might be most useful as we. I mean, we do a lot of work, but also have a lot of colleagues who are engaged with the governments on policy dialogue, to say what are the kinds of issues that they're facing and what indicators might be most helpful. Bring in the academics, bring in the researchers to sort of help put some meat on those indicators. I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Madhur. And I think some good reflections on the missing pieces. But I think, and not unexpectedly, I mean, most of your comments and suggestions were on the action piece, which I very much expected, the sentinel indicators that underpin the transformation of the food system as on the policy action. So I want to turn now to Jess and Lawrence, I mean, for some response, I mean, to the issues that Geeta and Madhu have raised. And Jess, you wanna kick us off on that?
I just thank you both, Geeta and Madhur, for your great insights and also constructive comments. I think I'll let Lawrence talk a bit more about kind of the broader issues. From the data side, we're definitely missing a ton of indicators, and we're not ashamed to admit that. I think it's a matter of us going through a deeper analysis with partners like World Bank, like IFPRI, like FAO, and not duplicating some of the platforms that are already out there, but really curating what is enriches the story. And, I think everyone sort of has their pet set of indicators that they want to see on a dashboard as where they work in the food system or what they care about in the food system. So I think, and that also pertains to us a bit, in that the way we originally designed the dashboard was to look at indicators that were potentially in the long causal pathway for improving diets and nutrition and health outcomes specifically. But food systems, of course, have many other outcomes, and we're expanding that now to environment, to economic and livelihood. So some of the questions that are coming up in the chat around cost of food, what about trade indicators, what about labor, we're keen to add more of that in the future to fill in some of those gaps. And what we're doing now is we're taking any data set or any indicator through a criteria checklist. We didn't do that so much in the beginning. It was more pulling together kind of the main low cost type of indicators. But now as we get more sophisticated data sets, particularly on land use changes and data sets owned by an investigator in a university, we're having to go through a deeper criteria check, and we'll be posting that on the dashboard of how we vet indicators and data sets. And we hope to do these pushes every 6 months. There's a couple of questions on that as well. And to get to Madhur's comments, we'll push on those data updates. But I just want to say one other thing, in that we don't want to publish indicators that are available for 15 high-income countries. There's a lot of dashboards out there and a lot of indices out there, and I won't mention the names of them, that are really wonderful resources, but when you look deeper, they're for 10 to 15 to 20 high-income countries. We're really trying to capture indicators that are representative for the world's food systems. So that's part of the criteria process too, moving forward, is that we don't create a bias towards countries that tend to have a rich data set of food system indicators. And we argue that keeping those gaps on the dashboard, you'll look at consumer behavior and there's no indicators, is our way of advocating that we need more data in that space. It's a call for private sector to step forward, or World Bank to step forward on things and let us know that you don't have this on your dashboard and we'd love to partner with you and put it on the dashboard. So we are very open to that, but by being transparent in the gaps that we have, we hope it garners more partnerships and people willing to provide data to share on the dashboard. So that on the data side, which is what Hopkins mainly does, is so I'm really open to that. I don't know, Lawrence, if you want to add more on that and to some of the other great comments from Geeta and Madhur.
I can do it quickly. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead, Lawrence.
Fantastic comments, guys. Thank you so much. We would love to partner with you and collaborate with you on this dashboard. So it's really great to hear that you're open to that. Thank you. I think both of you said, wouldn't it be nice if we had some more economic kind of data? If we had more data on prices, more data on taxes and subsidies, more data on just basically market information, market efficiency information, price transmission efficiency. I'd like to see more data on finance, what kind of finance is available, more data on small and medium enterprises, which make up the bulk of the food system in many African and Asian countries. There's just a ton of more data, including the trade data as well. So the challenge always is to, it's like whenever anyone designs a questionnaire, it goes through a circular process. It starts out small, it ends in the middle, it's massive. And in the end, you kind of get a bit of discipline and you have to make it manageable and doable. And I think we're in the sort of expanding phase, and I think we'll have to come around to which variables and data and indicators are really constraining action. And so we're in the grow indicator phase, and I think we'll have to get to the sifting, winnowing with a perspective to action. And I think the use cases which Jess mentioned, which I failed to mention, but are really important, they will help us get a sense of what's really valuable and what's really important, rather than what's nice to have. So we're very conscious of the fact that we don't want this to end up to be, I think, as Geeta said, a data dump. It has to be something that is really, every indicator needs to earn its place on the dashboard. We talked about the gaps, and Jess mentioned environment, I mentioned economics, other people have mentioned labor. We talked about the need to get subnational, but one of the other gaps we're very conscious of is the fact, and I think Madhur brought it up in the context of COVID, is that there isn't very much real time. In fact, there's no near real time or real time data in the dashboard. Everything's sort of annual, maybe twice a year updated. So we're working quite hard on a new grant to sort of figure out how we're going to do a review of real time or near real time data sources that are relevant for food systems, and see if we can again link up with those sources of data. And on the use examples I gave, I mean, yes, they're entirely heuristic. They're not based on, they're not real case studies, because the dashboard's only been going publicly available for 3 months. So we're holding a competition that's running through September. I think we'll get some interesting feedback on use. This is useful, this is not useful, and we'll probably run this again in 6 to 9 months to see. We constantly want to get feedback on how is this useful. So we'll get feedback from the country case studies, the engagement surveys, the work in the gain countries. If there's any big NGO out there that wants to do a systematic use analysis of the dashboard, we'd be really thrilled to hear about that. We're not precious about this. We designed it as a global public good, and we want it to be just that. Over.
Okay, thank you very much, Jess and Lawrence, for those responses. Excellent, and also, you know, very much noted, Jess. I mean, that this food systems dashboard is intended to be a global dashboard and not just for OECD countries. And of course, you know, given the clients and the countries that we are working on, I mean, that's very relevant for us, and when we use and looking forward to using the food systems dashboard. We still have almost kind of 100 people on the line. A little bit, but I think we're close to 90 now. So I would assume that we have lots of questions, and we have about 15 minutes or so to go into those. So I will now turn to Laura, who has been looking at the chat. I mean, to see, you know, what are the most common questions, Laura, that our participants have put forward that you think we should put forward to Jess and Lawrence. Over to you, Laura.
Thanks very much, Martine. Yes, we've had some great questions. I think we had a first cluster of questions on indicators, but I think Lawrence and Jess have mostly answered those. We had a second cluster, or one question on typologies from Joachim. He asked, regarding the food system typology, is this based on the most recent data? As we are looking at the food systems transformation, are things changing over time, and are you updating these? Then there were some questions around the content of the dashboard. So some of these were question stroke suggestions from Pat. Does the food systems and supply chains need to include social protection systems? For example, regions with high prices relative to income with high anemia rates needs high coverage of iron and folic acid to supplement, to supply nutrition requirements. There was a suggestion from Mohammed Hamadi that, have you thought about integrating the influence of media on the food system? And then a question from Fabud asking or suggesting, it appears that the dashboard primarily focuses on variables that describe the performance or outcome of a country's food system. Have you considered variables that describe the fundamental conditions, such as key policies that lead to these outcomes? If not, how much value would it provide to use the dashboard's data alongside data on underlying policy conditions that governments and policymakers can directly act on? A question from Astrid.
Laura, so I think there's quite a few questions
Okay,
already.
let me
Yeah, so let's kind of split it.
Okay.
So this is the first round. Jess, Lawrence, any responses to that? You can pick and choose what you think. I mean, you feel best positioned to respond to.
Lawrence, do you want me to go first?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. On the typologies, those we're actually we're submitting a paper to Nature as part of a larger set of food innovation series that's coming out. So hopefully we'll put the methodology of the typologies through the peer review process, which is of course important, along with the diagnosing of the on-off track, which is always contentious and incredibly difficult to do when there's not a lot of thresholds available of food system indicators and what's good and what's bad. But on the typologies, we basically based those typologies on 4 indicators: agriculture value added per worker, share of dietary energy from staples, supermarket density, so per 100,000 population, and percent urban population. And I think the question was around how frequently are those typologies updated. We'll be updating the typologies every year because, of course, you can imagine countries might shift in between the different 5 food system types depending on the quintile rankings and where they fall. And that will be automated because a lot of that data is pushed from other public servers. So countries, the typologies that they fall within might change over time. And we've done a lot of validation of looking at key outcome indicators of those typologies, as countries transition. What does the obesity trends look like? What does the undernutrition look like? What do food environments look like? And they're quite valid in some of those macro indicators. To Pat on great question on coverage intervention. So if you have this, what's the coverage of iron, folate, like you had said, or is there a safety net, a food safety net in place? We don't have any of those more programmatic coverage interventions. And I can imagine that would be quite hard to get across the world to see what kind of coverage interventions countries are implementing that relate to food systems. But DataDent, a partner that's working with us there at Johns Hopkins, they're doing a lot of analysis looking at gaps around particularly nutrition intervention coverage. But that I don't see us doing that in the near future. And just on influence of media, I love the idea, but again, how do we capture that in a metric? It'd be really interesting to hear more on that. And key policy conditions, we have some policy metrics on the dashboard, like does the country have a food-based dietary guideline? Does the country have a fortification policy? Does the country have, does it participate in one of the trade agreements? So we have some key policies, but we need to strengthen that. But again, a lot of that policy work involves us going to country level sites or the WHO GINA and going through massive reams of PDFs to pull out policies. It's not an easy task, and one that we had 3 PhD students working on this year. So the whole policy side is kind of tied up into loose threads, not on a coherent set database. But IFPRI's been doing some work on updating. They have a whole policy portal that Dave Shirley and Danielle Resnick have been working on, which we will most likely pull from when that is more populated over time. Lawrence?
Lawrence,
You're muted,
I think
Lawrence.
you're muted, Lawrence.
I don't know how to unmute.
Oh, you're muted now.
Thanks.
Fine now. Please go ahead.
I can't seem to figure out how to unmute myself, which is probably a good thing. Thanks, Vivek, for unmuting me. On the policy side of things, yeah, WHO has also an NCD policy database that we could use as well. We're a bit, you know, we know we need to do more on policy, but we're also we're wary for two reasons. One, it's a lot of work. We'll do it because we have to do it. But two, you know, just having a policy on the book doesn't mean that the policy is implemented or enforced. But I think if we're going to end up linking the DIAGNOSE to a set of policy areas and policy suggestions, we have to be able to say, policymakers have to be able to know that the dashboard is pointing you towards these 20 policies, and you need to know whether you actually have these policies in place or not. Because if you already have them in place, then that's great, but it means that they're not working as well as they could be working. So we need to do more on policies. On social protection, we are talking with Ugo Gentili and Luke Christensen at the bank about how to link up food systems with social protection. I think it's a big area. Bank has a lot of comparative advantage in the social protection area. I think linking social protection up with food systems is a big opportunity, especially in this COVID era where social protection programs are expanding to so many people. It's a massive demand platform for not just food, but for more nutritious food. And on the media side of things, yeah, you know, it's first of all, how do we get the data? Maybe it's there. Second of all, do you mean sort of the openness, the freeness of media as a way of eliciting government responsiveness and sort of general openness, or do you mean the bombard, how much kids see, how many food adverts do kids see every week? That's a different type of media. I think both of those are potentially really important. Before we add any indicator, we're always thinking to ourselves, is there a strong rationale for an inclusion of an indicator? Is there some kind of theory of change that supports the inclusion of this indicator to some kind of outcome of interest? And it's actually really difficult because you can always find a way to link an indicator to an outcome of interest. So we're open to all suggestions, and but it's important to, if anyone suggests an indicator to us, we're always saying to tell what's the story, what's the theory of change, what's the pathway to impact that you think is important, which outcome indicator do you have in mind, and what's the pathway through which the addition of this indicator will help tell a more powerful story. Over.
And I would just add to that, I think it's also, we get a lot of requests for indicators, but again, like how many countries is it representing, and how hard is it to get the data? Can you imagine us doing a whole policy analysis and having to look through, you know, PDFs and going to country websites, and then how often would we do that and update that? We can't underestimate the labor and capacity costs to do that. And I think it's easy for people to argue for indicators, but of those who are trying to pull it together, I like to emphasize that because it is incredibly time consuming, and we have to start acknowledging our overworked world and the capacity to do that. So yeah, it's just something to think about.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you very much. Back to you, Laura. I think we have time for one other round of questions, although we have to keep it relatively short because I have a hard, I have another meeting at 10 that I need to chair, so I really need to kind of log off here at 10 o'clock. So, but I think when we do it fast, we can do it. Laura, take another one or two questions that you think are most relevant.
Okay, so we had a question about possibilities for the private sector to cooperate with data. Any thoughts on that would be great. A suggestion about linking this to food security through some of the World Bank products on, for example, the LSMS ISA or the household data that we have. And then, let's see. I think there were mainly suggestions that I would send over on how to use this. One question on like, is there a methodology that provides a background for how people should interact with the dashboard? Maybe some tools around how the dashboard is envisioned to be used from your side, that materials on that.
Very good.
So I'll leave it
Very
at
good.
that. Thank you.
Very good. Very good. So, Jess, Lawrence, maybe a 1-minute reaction to those questions. Can you do
Yes,
that?
there is a training. There's some training videos on the food systems dashboard on the About page. We have a few training videos. So I highly recommend for first-time users going to the dashboard to watch those videos. And you know, Lawrence sort of trained himself. He wasn't really involved in the back end side of the dashboard, and he really developed those case studies through his own curiosity. And now we can all argue Lawrence is really good quantitatively and he knows his way around data, but he established all of those figures himself. So we've put some of his webinars he's done on how he thinks about the data, the dashboard, as Lawrence being a user. And we've put those on there as well, which I found really informative myself as good training pieces for people of how they think about data. And on the LSMS, we do have some LSMS data on there, but we need more. One of our key partners is Dave Shirley at Michigan State, who is a big fan of LSMS as an agriculture economist. And we do have some of that LSMS data, but really would be keen to work with World Bank on how we can partner together and add more of that data. So yeah, thank you.
Very good. Lawrence, any additions?
Am I unmuted?
No, yeah, you're totally unmuted. So we hear very
unleashed. LSMS, we love LSMS. We love Jero Carletto and his team and what they do. And yeah, the more we can get, the better we will use it. It tends to be, sometimes for some countries it's quite old data, sort of 15 years old, but it's high quality, and that's what we want, high quality data. So thank you for that. We do need to do more work on methodologies and tools for using the dashboard. We've begun. I'm hardly a typical user, so while my experiences can be helpful, we need something a bit more structured, and that's what the country case studies are all about. They're gonna help us develop tools to help generate user experience, good user experiences. On the private sector, it's difficult. The private sector. I mean, we can get data about the private sector. We can do that. We can get market concentration data and that kind of stuff. Getting data, what we really want is some data from the private sector, and that's really quite difficult because it's all competitive and commercially sensitive. We're trying to figure out what's a good pre-competitive mechanism for that. The work with Euromonitor is a really good pre-competitive mechanism, but we could be doing more. Is the private sector using it as much as we would like to think they are? We don't know yet. We've done a couple of seminars with the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, one with the Consumer Goods Forum, and we're working on with the Sun Business Network, Scaling Up Nutrition Business Network, to make it more usable for them as well. But definitely, we don't want it just to be useful for researchers, just the World Bank staff, just governments. We want it to be useful for businesses too, because there's such an important driver of food systems. Over.
Very good. Thank you very much, Lawrence and Jess. So let me bring this very interesting webinar to closure. I mean, and just to state, I mean, that we as in the bank, are very much interested in bringing the food systems approach that, I think up until now, the discussion has been on that, I mean, very much global, maybe even the bias on OECD countries, maybe a little bit academic and focusing on theoretical framework. Now, how do you bring that agenda, I mean, to the countries? I think you see an important role for the bank there, and to translate, I mean, that agenda into action. And I think today's presentation discussion, I mean, clearly shows, I mean, that the food systems dashboard could be a very important tool that we like to use in doing so. I personally like very much, I mean, the comparators, the comparison, the country comparison, Lawrence, that you put up. Because, you know, when it comes to convincing policymakers, I mean, they don't necessarily like to hear from the World Bank and other organizations. They actually like to know what their neighbors are doing. And, you know, I think that could be actually very powerful. I mean, to translate, I mean, the data and the evidence into action when policymakers know, I mean, that their neighbors are doing better. So in that sense, you know, my intention is to put, I mean, this dashboard in the hands of our task teams. I mean, we have, of course, staff all across the globe. I mean, the bank has offices in most countries, so that actually they can start using it, and at the same time, then maybe also start feeding into the dashboard. I think that would be very useful as well. We have an agriculture global forum, virtual, coming up in November. So if there's interest on your side, I mean, we can even organize a kind of a hands-on training session that actually trains staff on actually how to use, I mean, the food systems dashboard. So I think that, you know, I'm just putting that forward for consideration. That might actually be useful as well, because most of those staff in the countries are also tracking prices. They're working, I mean, with Madhu and his food security team, particularly in the context of COVID-19. I mean, to kind of put prices and the price changes forward in the global bulletin that we produce every week. So I see, you know, very good prospects for collaboration in that sense. So with that, also a final word on, so there's the proceedings have been recorded, and we will also curate, I mean, also the questions and provide answers to all the questions that have been put forward. So they will also be available at some point, reflecting the deliberation of this webinar. And with that, I bring this to closure with a very big thank you to Jess, I mean, to Lawrence, you know, and I hope this is also the beginning of a kind of a collaboration moving forward, I mean, to kind of put the food systems dashboard into action. And also a big thank you to Madhu and Gita for the discussions, comments and suggestions. And of course, to all the participants, I mean, for being here and putting forward your questions. Very much appreciated. Thank you very much. Have a good day.
Thank you. It was great.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.